Hello everyone. Today, we are going to live behind the stress of modern technology, corporate disasters, and the hassle of the city. Today, we are going to travel back in time to a place of absolute silence, shadows, and forgotten genius. We are going to dive into a story about architecture, obsession, and what happens when a building is designed not used to be lived in, but to be solved. I am a master architectural restorer. My highly specialized hobby is to enter historic buildings that have been abandoned or sealed for decades, and meticulously bring them back to life without destroying their original soul. Ideal with crumbling plaster, rotten mahogany, and the heavy, suffocating smell of time itself. 3 years ago, I received the most fascinating and terrifying commission of my entire career. A wealthy historical trust that purchased Blackwood Manor, a massive, sprawling Victorian Gothic estate isolated in the misty, rain-swept mountains of the Pacific Northwest. The history of Blackwood Manor was the stuff of local legend. It was built in 1912 by Elias Blackwood, a brilliant, eccentric, and fiercely reclusive clockmaker and industrial engineer. In 1925, following a personal tragedy, Elias dismissed all of his servants, walked out the front door, and the entire estate hermetically sealed. Heavy iron plates were bolted over the massive oak doors, and the windows were shattered with sick lead. For nearly a century, no human being had stepped foot inside. The trust hired me to be the first person to break the seal, map the interior, and evaluate the structural integrity of the mansion. I arrived on a freezing November morning, surrounded by a dense, grey fog that made the towering stone turrets of the house look like jagged teeth against the sky. Armed with crowbars, heavy flashlights, and a team of assistants, we could throw the rusted iron bolts of the main entrance. When the heavy oak doors finally cracked open, exhaling a breath of cold, stellar that had been trapped since the roaring 20s, I stepped into the grand foyer. The silence was absolute, heavy, and depressive. Everything, the grand sweeping staircase, the crystal chandeliers, the velvet armchairs, was buried under a thick, grey blanket of undisturbed dust. It was a perfect, untouched time capsule. But as I began to measure the rooms, I quickly realized that Elias Blackwood had left behind something far more complex than just a dusty house.
My first week was spent strictly mapping the first floor. I used a high-tech laser scanner to create a three-dimensional digital blueprint of the mansion. But on the 7th day, while reviewing the digital model on my laptop in the dusty grand dining room, I noticed a glaring architectural impossibility. The exterior walls of the mansion formed a perfect rectangle. But the interior rooms, when mapped and fitted together on the screen, left a massive, unaccounted-for empty space in the very center of the house. There was a void of roughly 600 square feet located right between the grand library and the master study. A hidden core. There were no doors leading to it, no windows, and no obvious corridors. In traditional architecture, a blind space that large is impossible unless it serves a highly specific, hidden purpose. I immediately grabbed my heaviest flashlight and walked into the grand library. The room was breathtaking, lined from floor to ceiling with thousands of decaying, leather-bound books. I began to inspect the massive oak bookshelves that shared a wall with the hidden void. I tapped the wood with my knuckles, listening for a hollow echo, but the oak was solid and immensely thick. I spent hours running my fingertips over the intricate wooden carvings, looking for a seam, a keyhole, or a hidden latch. It wasn't until I reached the massive stone fireplace at the center of the wall that I found it. Carved into the marble mantel was a delicate, incredibly detailed relief of the solar system. But it wasn't just a carving. When I brushed the thick layer of dust away from the carving of the planet Saturn, I noticed that the tiny marble rings around the planet were separate from the main stone. They were made of tarnished brass, painted to look like marble. Holding my breath, I pressed my thumb against the brass rings and pushed. With a sharp, metallic click that echoed loudly in the dead silence of the room, the rings pushed inward. Suddenly, the floor beneath my boots began to vibrate. Deep within the walls, I heard the heavy, grinding sound of massive iron gears turning, counterweights dropping, and thick chains being pulled. The entire house seemed to groan, waking up from a 100-year slumber. The massive stone fireplace, which must have weighed several tons, slowly and smoothly slid forward on hidden iron tracks, revealing a pitch-black, narrow stone corridor behind it. Blackwood Manor wasn't just a house. It was a giant mechanical puzzle box. My assistants refused to enter the dark corridor, terrified that the century-old mechanisms might collapse and crush us. But my curiosity was an overwhelming, burning obsession. I took my high-powered flashlight and stepped into the hidden passage. The air inside smelled strongly of machine oil, brass polish, and dry stone. The corridor led me into a narrow, vertical shaft filled with a staggering array of mechanical engineering. It looked like the inside of a gargantuan pocket watch. There were towering brass gears, thick leather drive belts, and massive lead counterweights suspended by thick iron chains. Elias Blackwood had essentially built a central mechanical nervous system for the entire mansion. As I followed the narrow catwalks through the mechanical core, I realized that the puzzle in the library was only the first step. The mansion was designed to be solved in a specific sequence. I found myself facing a heavy iron door locked by a complex acoustic mechanism. There was no keyhole, only a series of finely tuned brass tuning forks mounted on the wall. I spent the next 3 weeks living entirely inside the mansion, sleeping on a cot in the grand foyer, obsessed with deciphering Elias's mind. I discovered that to open the acoustic door, I had to find a specific antique music box hidden in the master bedroom, wind it up, and place it exactly 3 inches from the tuning forks so the resonant frequency would vibrate the internal tumblers of the lock. When the iron door finally swung open, it revealed a network of pneumatic tubes and water-powered hydraulic lifts connected to the mansion's underground river. Every time I solved a puzzle, the house physically changed. Bookshelves slid away to reveal hidden spiral staircases. Hardwood floors lowered to create ramps. The mansion was shifting, reconfiguring itself around me like a living, breathing mechanical organism. The sheer genius required to design a house that could transform without electric power, relying entirely on gravity, water pressure, and mechanical tension, was absolutely staggering. By the end of the second month, I had solved 6 massive architectural puzzles, slowly making my way up through the hidden core of the house. This journey finally led me to the highest point of the mansion, a room that was not on any of the original architectural blueprints, the Grand Aviary. It was a massive circular room situated directly under the main glass dome of the mansion's roof. But the glass wasn't clear. It was a complex, beautiful stained glass mosaic depicting a starry night sky. In the exact center of this dusty, circular room stood the most magnificent machine I had ever laid eyes on. It was a towering 10-foot-tall brass astrolabe, a complex rotating map of the stars, covered in hundreds of interlocking gears, lenses, and mirrors. The final puzzle was entirely optical. The astrolabe was connected to a massive iron vault door embedded in the floor. Around the base of the machine, engraved in the brass, was a riddle written by Elias. Only when the heavens align with the earth will the heart of the house reveal its ultimate truth. I quickly realized that the lenses on the astrolabe were designed to catch beams of light passing through the stained glass dome. But it couldn't just be any light. It had to be the precise angle of the sun during the Winter Solstice, the shortest day of the year. I had exactly 4 days to figure out the exact mechanical alignment of the astrolabe before the solstice arrived. If I missed the window, the angle of the sun would change, and I would have to wait an entire year for the light to align again. I worked frantically, day and night, calculating the angles of refraction, cleaning the century-old lenses with specialized chemical solvents, and painstakingly rotating the massive brass rings of the astrolabe until they locked into the positions indicated by Elias's cryptic notes. On the morning of the winter solstice, I stood in the dusty room, my heart hammering against my ribs. At exactly 11:42 a.m., the winter sun broke through the heavy rain clouds. A single, blinding beam of pure golden light pierced through a clear crystal in the stained glass dome, struck the primary lens of the astrolabe, fractured into 3 separate beams, and hit 3 hidden photoelectric mechanical sensors on the walls simultaneously. The room filled with the deafening sound of heavy tumblers clicking into place. A blast of compressed air hissed from the floor, blowing a century of dust into the air. Slowly, majestically, the massive iron vault door in the floor began to unscrew itself like the hatch of a submarine, opening to reveal a brightly lit, pristine subterranean chamber. I climbed down the brass ladder into the final room, my hands trembling with adrenaline and awe. I expected to find a vault filled with gold, or perhaps a morbid tomb. But Elias Blackwood had left behind something far more valuable. The chamber was a perfectly preserved, climate-controlled mechanical workshop. And in the center, sitting on a velvet-draped table, was his magnum opus. It wasn't a clock. It was a mechanical clockwork automaton, a life-sized figure of a woman made of porcelain, brass, and intricate wirework. It was a perfect, breathtaking mechanical recreation of his late wife, the woman whose death had caused him to seal the house. Beside the automaton was a leather-bound journal. I opened the fragile, yellowed pages and read Elias's final entry from 1925. He wrote that the grief of losing his wife was too heavy to bear, so he poured his soul, his love, and his genius into building a puzzle so complex that only a mind as dedicated as his own could ever reach her. He sealed the house not to hide his treasure, but to protect it, waiting for the day when someone would have the patience to understand his mechanical language and appreciate the masterpiece he had built in the dark. I spent the next 2 years restoring Blackwood Manor, keeping every single puzzle and hidden mechanism perfectly intact. The trust turned the mansion into the most unique, highly guarded museum in the world. And today, when I walk through those halls and hear the faint, distant grinding of brass gears echoing behind the plaster walls, I don't just hear a building. I hear the heartbeat of a genius who managed to conquer time, grief, and gravity, leaving behind a puzzle that outlived him by 100 years.